Blood-red sunlight spilled across the horizon as Bonnie Montgomery pressed herself against the wall of her bedroom, listening to her husband's drunken curses floating up from the saloon below. Her fingers trembled as she traced the fresh bruise blooming on her cheek, a cruel gift from Rufus Montgomery, the most feared outlaw in Darton County, Arizona Territory, 1885. Summer heat pressed down on the small mining town of Copper Creek like a weighted blanket, but the suffocation Bonnie felt had nothing to do with the weather. 3 years of marriage to Rufus had taught her that summer's heat only worsened his temper, and the thundering footsteps now climbing the stairs told her this night would be no different. Bonnie smoothed her honey blonde hair and straightened her dress, knowing that any perceived imperfection would only fuel his rage. At 23, she'd already lived a lifetime of fear. She'd been barely 18 when Rufus had first spotted her working in her father's general store, his predatory gaze marking her as long before she understood what that meant. The door slammed open. Rufus filled the doorframe, whiskey fumes preceding him into the room. "Woman. Where's my dinner?" His eyes, cold as a rattlesnake's, swept over her. "It's waiting downstairs, Rufus. I can bring it up if you'd like." Bonnie kept her voice gentle, careful, too busy primping to tend to your husband. He stalked closer, and Bonnie fought not to step back. Thinking about running again, the memory of her last escape attempt and the punishment that followed flashed through her mind. "No, Rufus, I would never." His laugh held no humor. "Good, because you know what happens to wives who don't know their place." His hand shot out, fingers digging into her arm, and everyone in this town knows better than to help Rufus Montgomery's woman. That much was true. Rufus and his gang controlled everything in Copper Creek, the mines, the saloon, even the sheriff who looked the other way whenever Rufus's name came up. No one would help her. No one would dare. "I'll get your dinner now," she whispered. He shoved her toward the door. "Make it quick." "The boys are waiting for me. We've got business tonight." Bonnie hurried down to the kitchen, grateful for even this brief reprieve. Business meant Rufus would be gone for hours, perhaps days, planning another stagecoach robbery or threatening miners who couldn't pay their protection money. Either way, she'd have time alone, time to breathe. As she assembled his plate, voices from the saloon drifted through the walls. Rufus's familiar growl mixed with the rougher tones of his gang members. Then a new voice, one she hadn't heard before, deep but gentler somehow, with an accent that hinted at Texas. "Just passing through," the stranger was saying, "looking for work with the cattle drives." "Ain't no cattle drives that come through Copper Creek," Rufus replied. "This here's mining country." "Then I reckon I took a wrong turn somewhere." Bonnie paused, plate in hand, straining to hear more. Something about that voice made her heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from something she couldn't quite name. When she entered the saloon with Rufus's dinner, she saw him immediately. The stranger stood at the bar, tall and straight-backed amid the hunched figures of the local miners and Rufus's gang. His dark hair curled slightly beneath his hat, and dust from the trail still clung to his denim and leather. When he turned slightly, Bonnie caught a glimpse of eyes as blue as the desert sky. For a single electric moment, those eyes met hers. The stranger nodded slightly, a gesture so small Rufus wouldn't notice, but it sent a jolt through Bonnie that she hadn't felt in years. It was recognition, somehow as though he could see past her carefully constructed mask of submission to the woman beneath. "Bonnie." Rufus's sharp voice broke the connection. "Quit your gawking and bring my food." She hurried to his table, setting the plate before him without meeting his eyes. As she turned to leave, Rufus grabbed her wrist. "This is my wife," he announced to the stranger, his fingers tightening possessively. "Prettiest thing in the Arizona Territory, ain't she?" The stranger touched the brim of his hat. "Madam," he said simply, but something in his tone made Bonnie's cheeks warm. "Name's Nate Callahan," he said, addressing Rufus now. "Like I said, I'm just passing through." "Well, Nate Callahan," Rufus said, his voice dangerously friendly, "in Copper Creek, everything goes through me first. You looking for a place to stay? If there's a boarding house, only place is above the saloon here. Bonnie can show you to a room." Rufus turned to her. "Make sure our guest is comfortable." Bonnie recognized the test. Rufus wanted to see if she'd show interest in the handsome stranger. She kept her eyes downcast. "Yes, Rufus." "And then come right back down," Rufus added, his voice hardening. "I want you where I can see you." "Yes, Rufus." The stranger Nate followed her up the narrow staircase to the second floor where several rooms stood ready for travelers, though few ever came to Copper Creek. Bonnie was acutely aware of his presence behind her, the quiet confidence in his step. "This one's available," she said, opening a door to a small but clean room. "There's water in the pitcher if you'd like to wash up." Nate stepped inside but didn't set down his saddlebags. "Thank you, Mrs. Montgomery." The formal address startled her. Most men in Copper Creek called her Rufus's woman or simply Bonnie with a familiarity she despised. "Is he always like that?" Nate asked quietly. Bonnie stiffened. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." His voice remained gentle, but his eyes, those impossibly blue eyes, held a knowledge that terrified her. "You shouldn't ask questions like that, Mr. Callahan." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "It isn't safe, for you or for me, for either of us." Bonnie glanced nervously toward the stairs. "I need to get back." Nate nodded but spoke again as she reached the door. "Mrs. Montgomery, I've found that even the darkest nights eventually give way to dawn." Bonnie didn't reply. She couldn't afford hope. Hope was dangerous. Back in the saloon, Rufus was deep in conversation with his right-hand man, Vernon Shaw. They fell silent as she approached. "Showed him to his room?" Rufus asked. "Yes, room 3. Rufus exchanged a look with Vernon that sent a chill down Bonnie's spine. "Good. Now go back upstairs and wait for me. I've got business to discuss." As Bonnie climbed the stairs again, she heard Rufus's low voice. "Keep an eye on that cowboy, Vern. Something about him doesn't sit right." For hours, Bonnie sat by the window of their bedroom, watching the dusty main street below. Eventually, Rufus and his men mounted their horses and rode out of town, just as she'd hoped. They'd be gone until morning at least. Sleep eluded her. The encounter with Nate Callahan had unsettled something within her stirred embers she thought long extinguished. It was foolish to even think about him. He was just passing through, and any man who crossed Rufus Montgomery usually ended up dead. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Bonnie froze, fear lancing through her. No one ever came to their rooms when Rufus was away. "Mrs. Montgomery," Nate's voice barely audible. "I saw them leave. Are you all right?" Bonnie opened the door a crack, her heart racing. "Mr. Callahan, you shouldn't be here, I know." He stood in the dim hallway, hat in hand. "But I couldn't help noticing that bruise on your face and the way he grabbed you." Shame burned through her. "It's not what you think, isn't it?" His eyes were kind, not pitying. "I've seen men like your husband before, Mrs. Montgomery. They take what isn't theirs to take, and they break what doesn't belong to them. You don't understand. He'll kill anyone who interferes." Bonnie's voice cracked. "Please, just go about your business and forget you saw anything." Nate studied her face. "What if I told you I could help?" A bitter laugh escaped her. "No one can help me, Mr. Callahan. Rufus owns this town. I'm not from this town." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with possibility. Bonnie's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it. "Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" she finally asked. "Because no one should live in fear, Mrs. Montgomery, and because—" He hesitated. "I've been looking for Rufus Montgomery for a long time." Alarm bells rang in Bonnie's mind. "Who are you really? Not who you're thinking." He glanced down the hallway. "This isn't the place to talk. Tomorrow, if you can, come to the livery stable. I'll tell you everything." Before she could respond, he disappeared down the hallway, leaving Bonnie with more questions than answers and a dangerous flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Morning arrived with a blazing sun and no sign of Rufus. Bonnie moved through her chores mechanically, her mind consumed with thoughts of Nate Callahan and his mysterious offer. It was madness to consider meeting him, absolute madness. And yet, as she finished the breakfast dishes, she found herself reaching for her shawl. The livery stable sat at the edge of town, the smell of hay and horses a welcome change from the stale whiskey scent of the saloon. Bonnie entered cautiously, glancing behind her to ensure no one had followed. Nate emerged from one of the stalls, his sleeves rolled up, evidence of honest work already marking his day. He smiled when he saw her, a genuine smile that transformed his face. "You came," he said simply. "I shouldn't have." Bonnie twisted her hands together. "If Rufus finds out, he won't." Nate gestured to a bench near the back wall. "Please sit. I need to explain some things." Bonnie perched on the edge of the bench, ready to flee at the first sign of danger. "You said you've been looking for Rufus. Why?" Nate leaned against the stable wall, his expression growing serious. "I work for Wells Fargo, Mrs. Montgomery. Not as a regular employee, I track down those who rob their stagecoaches." "You're a bounty hunter." Fear gripped her. Men in Nate's profession were often as dangerous as the outlaws they pursued. "Not exactly. I'm more of an investigator. I gather evidence, track movements. The company's lost 3 coaches in the past year, all in this territory, all with the same method. And you think Rufus is responsible? I know he is." Nate's voice hardened slightly. "What I don't have is enough evidence to bring him in." "The local law won't touch him. Sheriff Daniels is in his pocket," Bonnie confirmed. "Exactly, but federal marshals aren't. If I can get solid proof of Rufus's involvement, I can telegraph the marshal's office in Tucson." Bonnie shook her head. "Even if you succeed, another outlaw will just take his place. Nothing will change. You could be free of him." Nate stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Mrs. Montgomery, Bonnie, no one should live the way you're living." The sound of her name on his lips sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. "You don't understand what he's capable of, the things he's done." She touched her bruised cheek unconsciously. "I can guess." Nate's eyes darkened with anger, not directed at her but for her. "Has he hurt you in other ways?" Bonnie looked away, unable to meet his gaze. The truth was too painful, too humiliating to voice aloud. "I'm sorry," Nate said softly. "That was too personal a question." "Why do you care?" Bonnie asked suddenly. "About what happens to me, I'm nothing to you." "That's not true." Nate knelt before her, bringing himself to her eye level. "Every person deserves dignity and safety, Bonnie. Every person matters." Something in his earnestness broke through her careful defenses. "What do you want from me?" "Information." "Anything you can tell me about Rufus's operations, his plans. I need to know when the next robbery will be." Bonnie considered this. Helping Nate meant betraying Rufus a death sentence if he ever found out. And yet, the alternative was returning to her cage, living in fear until Rufus's temper or a bullet from a rival finally ended her misery. "I don't know specifics," she said slowly. "Rufus doesn't trust women with men's business, but I hear things, fragments of conversations." Hope sparked in Nate's eyes. Anything could help. They mentioned Cottonwood Creek several times and something about a shipment coming through on the 15th. "That's 3 days from now." Nate straightened. "Do you know what route they'll take?" "No," but Bonnie hesitated. "Rufus keeps papers in a lockbox under our bed, plans, maps sometimes. Could you get a look at them?" The risk was enormous. "Maybe, when he's drinking heavily, he sleeps like the dead." "I wouldn't ask if there was another way." Nate's expression was troubled. "I don't want to put you in danger." "I'm already in danger, Mr. Callahan. Every day I stay with him." A noise outside the stable startled them both. Bonnie jumped to her feet, panic flaring. "It's all right," Nate soothed, peering out a small window. "Just the blacksmith." "I should go," Bonnie said, "if anyone saw us talking." "Wait." Nate reached for her hand, then seemed to think better of it. "Meet me here tomorrow, same time." Bonnie knew she should refuse. This tentative alliance was dangerous enough already. But something about Nate, Callahan, made her want to trust again, to believe that perhaps her life wasn't destined to end in Rufus's shadow. "Tomorrow," she agreed and slipped out the back door of the stable. That night, Rufus returned in high spirits, which usually meant his business had been profitable. He drank heavily at dinner, boasting to his men about their next big score. "Wells Fargo won't know what hit them," he laughed, slamming his empty glass down. "By the time they figure out we changed the route, we'll be counting our gold." Bonnie served them quietly, absorbing every word while appearing disinterested. When Rufus finally stumbled upstairs, he passed out almost immediately, snoring loudly within minutes. Heart pounding, she waited until his breathing deepened, then slid carefully from the bed. The floorboards creaked treacherously as she knelt and reached beneath the bed frame. The metal lockbox was heavier than she expected. Rufus kept the key in his boot, which lay discarded by the door. Bonnie extracted it with trembling fingers, each second an eternity of terror. If he woke now? The key turned silently, the lid opening to reveal a stack of papers. Bonnie lifted them cautiously, straining to see in the dim moonlight filtering through the curtains. A map caught her attention, lines marking the usual Wells Fargo route and an alternative path circled in thick pencil. Notations indicated times, positions for men to wait in ambush. Memorizing as much as she could, Bonnie carefully replaced everything exactly as she'd found it. She returned the key to Rufus's boot and slid back into bed, lying rigid with fear until dawn broke. At the livery stable the next morning, Nate listened intently as she recounted what she'd seen. "They're planning to intercept the stage here," she explained, sketching the route in the dirt floor with a stick. Rufus said something about a gold shipment for the new bank in Prescott. Nate's face was grim. "That matches what I've heard. This is exactly what I needed, Bonnie." "What will you do now?" telegraphed the marshal in Tucson. "With this information, they can set a trap." He hesitated. "When they come for Rufus, it won't be safe for you here." The reality of her situation crashed over Bonnie. Even if Nate succeeded, Rufus's men would remain, and they would assume she had betrayed their leader. "I have nowhere to go. Come with me." The words seemed to surprise Nate as much as they did her. "When this is over, I mean. I can take you somewhere safe, somewhere Rufus's reputation doesn't reach." "Why would you do that?" "Because..." Nate stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. "Because in the short time I've known you, I've seen your courage, your resilience. You deserve a chance at a real life, Bonnie." Something warm unfurled in her chest, a feeling so long forgotten she barely recognized it. "You barely know me. I'd like to change that." His voice was soft but certain. "If you'd let me." Before Bonnie could respond, a shadow fell across the stable entrance. They both turned to see Vernon Shaw standing there, his narrow face twisted in a knowing smirk. "Well, well," he drawled. "Ain't this cozy?" Rufus was right to be suspicious. Nate stepped in front of Bonnie. "We were just talking, friend." "Sure you were." Vernon's hand moved to the gun at his hip. "Rufus is gonna be mighty interested to hear about his wife's morning visits to the Cowboy." "Leave her out of this," Nate said, his voice hardening. "Whatever you think is happening, you're wrong." Vernon laughed. "I think the lady can explain herself to her husband. Come on, Bonnie. Rufus is waiting at the saloon." Bonnie felt the blood drain from her face. If Rufus knew she'd been meeting Nate, speaking with him alone. "She's not going anywhere with you," Nate said, reaching slowly toward his own holster. "Don't," Bonnie whispered. "He'll kill you." Vernon's smile widened. "Smart woman. Now come along before I decide to put a bullet in your new friend anyway." With no choice, Bonnie stepped forward. As she passed Nate, she whispered, "Cottonwood Creek, tomorrow at noon." Vernon grabbed her arm roughly, dragging her from the stable. Bonnie didn't look back, couldn't bear to see the concern in Nate's eyes or the choice that lay before him. Follow his duty to stop the stagecoach robbery or try to save her from Rufus's wrath. The walk to the saloon was the longest of Bonnie's life. Each step brought her closer to a reckoning she had feared for years. Vernon's grip never loosened, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "Rufus is gonna teach you a lesson you won't forget," he sneered. "Nobody makes a fool of him." The saloon was empty save for Rufus, who sat at his usual table cleaning his revolver. He looked up as Vernon shoved Bonnie forward, causing her to stumble. "Found her at the livery," Vernon reported. "With that cowboy." Rufus's expression didn't change, but something deadly flickered in his eyes. "Is that right?" He set the gun down carefully. "And what were you doing with Mr. Callahan, wife?" Bonnie struggled to keep her voice steady. "Nothing, Rufus. He asked about buying a horse. I was helping Mary at the general store and told him where to find John at the stable. Lying already." Rufus stood slowly. "Vernon says you were mighty cozy with him." "We were just talking." Bonnie fought to keep the tremor from her voice. "He's new in town. He was asking about work." Rufus circled her like a predator. 3 years married, and you still think I'm stupid." His hand shot out, gripping her jaw painfully. I see how you look at him. Think I don't notice when another man wants what's mine. It's not like that, Bonnie gasped. Vernon, Rufus said, not taking his eyes off Bonnie, find Callahan, bring him here. I want him to watch what happens when a man touches my wife. Terror gripped Bonnie. No, Rufus, please, there's nothing between us. We'll see about that. He shoved her into a chair. Don't move. Vernon left, and Rufus returned to cleaning his gun, the methodical clicks of metal against metal filling the silent room. Bonnie's mind raced. If Vernon found Nate, Rufus would kill him without hesitation. Her only hope was that Nate had already left town, already headed to Cottonwood Creek to stop the robbery. Minutes stretched into an hour. Finally, Vernon returned alone, looking frustrated. He's gone, he reported. Horse is gone from the stable, asked around, nobody's seen him since this morning. Relief flooded through Bonnie, though she kept her expression neutral. Nate had chosen his mission over a confrontation with Rufus. It was the right choice, the only choice that might lead to Rufus's eventual capture. Rufus's face darkened with rage. He ran. He turned to Bonnie, eyes narrowed. What did you tell him? Nothing, she insisted. I barely spoke to him. Liar. Rufus backhanded her, the force of the blow knocking her from the chair. He's working for someone, Wells Fargo, the marshals. Bonnie touched her bleeding lips, saying nothing. Rufus grabbed her by the hair, yanking her up. What did you tell him about our business? Answer me. Nothing, Rufus, I swear. Tears streamed down her face, partly from pain but mostly from the desperate need to be convincing. I would never betray you. For a terrible moment, Rufus searched her face. Then, with a disgusted sound, he threw her back into the chair. Lock her in our room, he ordered Vernon. I need to warn the boys. We're moving up the job, doing it tonight instead of tomorrow. Bonnie's heart sank. Nate wouldn't be expecting them tonight. He'd be waiting at Cottonwood Creek tomorrow, when the stagecoach was originally scheduled to pass through. Vernon dragged her upstairs and shoved her into the bedroom. Rufus says you stay put until he gets back. He locked the door from the outside, his laughter fading as he descended the stairs. Alone, Bonnie sank onto the bed, despair washing over her. She had failed. Nate would be waiting in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Rufus would get away with another robbery. Worse, he now suspected her loyalty. When he returned, his punishment would be severe, perhaps fatal. She moved to the window, watching as Rufus and Vernon gathered their men in the street below. Within minutes, they had mounted up and ridden out of town, dust rising behind them in the late afternoon sun. Bonnie tested the door, locked securely. The window was her only option, but it was a long drop to the ground below. She scanned the room for anything that might help, her gaze settling on the bedsheets. If she tore them into strips and knotted them together. Working quickly, Bonnie fashioned a crude rope. It wouldn't reach all the way to the ground, but it might get her close enough to jump without breaking bones. She secured one end to the bedpost and threw the makeshift line out the window. The descent was terrifying, the sheet rope creaking ominously with each movement. When she reached its end, Bonnie dangled for a moment, gathering her courage, then let go. The fall was shorter than she feared, though she landed hard, pain shooting through her ankle. Limping slightly, she made her way to the livery stable. She needed a horse if she had any hope of reaching Nate in time to warn him. The stable was empty, but several horses remained in their stalls. Bonnie had ridden occasionally before her marriage, though Rufus rarely allowed it now. She selected a sturdy mare, her hands trembling as she saddled the animal. Every second counted. She had no idea how much of a head start Rufus had, or if she could even find Nate before it was too late. As the sun began to set, Bonnie rode out of Copper Creek, following the main trail toward Cottonwood Creek. She pushed the mare as hard as she dared in the fading light, praying she remembered the route correctly from Rufus's maps. Darkness fell completely, the desert night bringing a sudden chill. Bonnie shivered, regretting her failure to grab a coat. The only light came from the stars and a thin crescent moon, barely enough to see the trail before her. After an hour of hard riding, she spotted a campfire in the distance, just off the main trail. Hope surged within her. It had to be Nate. No one else would be camping alone in this remote area. As she approached, she saw a figure rise from beside the fire, the unmistakable silhouette of a man reaching for his gun. "Who's there?" Nate's voice carried through the darkness. "It's Bonnie." She called back, relief washing over her. Nate rushed forward as she dismounted, his face a mixture of shock and concern in the firelight. "Bonnie, what are you doing here? How did you get away?" "There's no time," she gasped, her lungs burning from the hard ride. "Rufus knows something's wrong. They've changed their plans. They're hitting the stagecoach tonight, not tomorrow." Nate's expression hardened. "Are you sure?" "I heard them planning it before I escaped. They suspect you're working for the law. You took an enormous risk coming here." Nate guided her to the fire, his hand gentle on her elbow. "Are you hurt?" "Just bruised." Bonnie sank down beside the fire, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. "Vernon found us at the stable. Rufus was angry." Nate's jaw tightened. "Did he hurt you?" She touched her swollen lip. "It could have been worse, much worse. I'm sorry." Nate knelt beside her, his voice thick with regret. "I should never have involved you in this." "I chose to help you," Bonnie reminded him. "What will you do now?" Nate glanced at the stars, calculating. "The stage doesn't come through until morning. If they're planning to hit it tonight, they must be planning to attack the way station at Gila Bend, catch it while it's stopped for the night." "That's what Rufus said, something about catching them sleeping. It's about 10 miles west of here." Nate stood, decision made. "I need to warn them." "I'm coming with you," Bonnie said, rising despite her exhaustion. "It's too dangerous. If there's a fight, I can't go back to Copper Creek," she interrupted. "Even if you stop Rufus, his men will kill me for betraying him. I have nowhere else to go." Nate studied her face in the firelight, seeing the determination there. "All right, but you'll stay back when we reach the station. Promise me that." Bonnie nodded, knowing she would promise him anything to avoid being left behind. They doused the fire and mounted up, Nate leading the way through the darkness. They rode side by side when the trail allowed, and Bonnie found herself stealing glances at his profile. In just days, this stranger had become her only ally, her only hope for a future beyond Rufus's control. "Why did you come back for me?" Nate asked suddenly. "You could have run anywhere after escaping." Bonnie considered the question. "Because you were the first person in years to really see me, not as Rufus's possession, but as a person with value." "You have more value than you know, Bonnie." His voice was soft in the darkness. "More courage, too." They rode in silence after that, each lost in their own thoughts. As they approached Gila Bend, Nate signaled for her to slow down. "The station should be just ahead," he whispered. "We need to approach carefully. Rufus and his men might already be in position." They dismounted, tethering their horses to a scrub oak. Nate drew his revolver, checking that each chamber was loaded. "Stay behind me, and if there's trouble, run. Don't look back." Bonnie nodded, though she had no intention of leaving him to face Rufus alone. They crept forward through the desert brush, the way station gradually taking shape in the darkness, a low adobe building with a corral to one side. A single lantern burned in the window, but otherwise the station appeared quiet, too quiet. "Something's wrong," Nate murmured. "There should be a guard, at least." As they drew closer, Bonnie spotted dark shapes on the ground near the station door. "Nate," she whispered, pointing. He squinted into the darkness. "Bodies," he confirmed grimly. "Looks like we're too late. Rufus has already been here." A horse whinnied softly from the corral, and Bonnie realized with horror that Rufus and his men might still be inside the station, perhaps preparing an ambush for the approaching stagecoach. "We should go back," she urged. "Get help." "There's no time. The stage will be here by dawn." Nate's expression was resolute. "Stay here. I'm going to circle around, try to see through the windows." Before she could protest, he disappeared into the darkness, moving with the silent grace of a man accustomed to dangerous situations. Bonnie crouched in the brush, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give away her position. Minutes stretched endlessly. Where was Nate? Had he been captured, killed? The uncertainty was unbearable. A hand clamped over her mouth, stifling her scream. "It's me," Nate breathed against her ear, releasing her once she relaxed. "They're inside, Rufus and 5 others. The station staff is dead." "What about the stagecoach?" "Due at dawn, from what I could gather. They're planning to take it when it stops to change horses." There are too many of them, Bonnie whispered. Even for you. Nate's face was grim in the starlight. I need to create a distraction, something to draw them out one by one. Let me help, Bonnie pleaded. I can know, his voice was firm. I'm not risking your life. A new voice spoke from the darkness behind them. Ain't that sweet? They whirled to find Vernon standing there, his gun trained on them. Boss said you might show up, Callahan. Didn't expect you'd bring the missus along. Nate moved slightly, positioning himself between Vernon and Bonnie. It's over, Shaw. The marshals are on their way, Vernon laughed. Nice try. Now both of you on your feet. Rufus is gonna be real happy to see you. With no choice they stood, Vernon keeping his gun trained on Nate. Moved toward the station, nice and slow. As they approached the adobe building, the door swung open, spilling lamplight into the yard. Rufus stood framed in the doorway, his face twisted with rage when he saw Bonnie. Bring them in, he ordered Vernon. The interior of the station was sparse, a few tables, a counter for customers, and a door leading to what must be sleeping quarters. The bodies of 2 men lay in the corner, covered with blankets. Rufus's other men lounged around the room, guns ready. Well, well, Rufus said, circling them like a wolf. The faithless wife and her cowboy hero, how touching. It's over, Montgomery, Nate said calmly. I've already sent word to the federal marshals about your operation. Somehow I doubt that. Rufus turned to Bonnie, his eyes cold. I always knew you were weak, but I never thought you'd betray me. You betrayed her every day with your cruelty, Nate shot back. Rufus backhanded him, splitting his lip. You don't talk about what's between a man and his wife. She deserves better than you, Nate said, spitting blood. Maybe so. Rufus drew his gun, pressing it to Nate's forehead. But she's mine until I say otherwise. No, Bonnie lunged forward, but Vernon held her back. Rufus, please don't. Give me one reason why I shouldn't put a bullet in his brain right now, Rufus growled. Because he works for Wells Fargo, Bonnie said desperately. Kill him and they'll never stop hunting you. Rufus paused, considering this. Is that true, Callahan? You a company man? Nate remained silent, his eyes fixed on Rufus with contempt. Doesn't matter, Rufus decided. After tonight's haul, we'll be heading to Mexico anyway. Tie them up, he ordered his men. We'll deal with them after we take the stage. Rough hands bound Bonnie and Nate to chairs on opposite sides of the room. Rufus approached Bonnie, grabbing her chin. When this is over, he promised, I'll make you wish you'd never laid eyes on him. He turned to his men. 2 of you stay here and watch them. The rest with me. We need to get in position before the stage arrives. As Rufus and 3 of his men left the station, Bonnie caught Nate's eye across the room. Despite their dire situation, she saw no fear in his gaze, only determination and something else. Something that made her heart beat faster despite their circumstances. The remaining outlaws, Vernon and a man Bonnie knew only as Jed settled in for the wait, Vernon cleaning his gun while Jed dozed in a chair by the door. Your husband's gonna kill you both, you know, Vernon said conversationally. Slow, probably. He don't like being crossed. He's not getting away with this, Nate replied evenly. Too many people know what he's done, Vernon laughed. Ain't nobody gonna miss 2 more bodies in the desert. Time crawled by. Bonnie worked subtly at her bonds, the rough rope chafing her wrists raw. Across the room, she could see Nate doing the same, though he kept his movements hidden from their captors. When a shot rang out from outside, both Vernon and Jed jumped to their feet. What the hell? Vernon moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. Stage ain't due for hours. Another shot, then another. Shouts echoed from the direction of the corral. Go check it out, Vernon ordered Jed. I'll watch these 2, Jed hesitated. Rufus said to stay together. Just go, Vernon snapped. Could be Apaches for all we know. Reluctantly, Jed headed for the door. The moment it closed behind him, Nate made his move. Vernon, he called. I think you should know something about Rufus. Vernon turned, annoyed. Shut your mouth. He's planning to cut you out. I overheard him telling the others, said you'd outlived your usefulness. You're lying. But doubt flickered across Vernon's face. Am I? Why do you think he left you behind instead of taking you for the stagecoach job? The big payday, Vernon stepped closer, anger replacing caution. You don't know nothing about it. I know Rufus Montgomery only looks out for himself, always has. Vernon raised his gun, pointing it at Nate's head. I said shut up. It was the distraction Bonnie needed. With one final, painful tug, her right hand slipped free of its binding. She reached for the only weapon available, a heavy ceramic mug left on the table beside her. With all her strength, she hurled it at Vernon's head. The mug caught him on the temple, not enough to knock him out but sufficient to stagger him. His gun discharged into the ceiling as he stumbled. Nate, who had been working his own bonds loose, lunged from his chair, tackling Vernon to the ground. The two men grappled for the gun, rolling across the dirty floor. Bonnie worked frantically to free her other hand and feet. Just as she succeeded, a shot rang out. Both men went still. Nate. Bonnie cried, rushing forward. To her immense relief, Nate rose slowly, Vernon's gun in his hand. Below him, Vernon lay motionless, a dark stain spreading across his chest. "Are you hurt?" Bonnie's hands moved over Nate, searching for injuries. "I'm all right," he assured her, though his breathing was labored. "But we need to move quickly. They'll have heard the shot." Outside, more gunfire erupted. Nate peered cautiously through the window. "Something's happening out there. Looks like Rufus and his men are engaged with someone else." "Who? I'm not sure, but this is our chance." Nate retrieved his own gun from where it had been tossed on a table. "We need to get to the horses and get out of here." They slipped out the back door of the station into the cool desert night. The sounds of battle continued from the direction of the road, shouts, gunfire, the frightened whinnying of horses. "This way," Nate whispered, leading Bonnie toward the small stable behind the station where their mounts were tethered. They had just reached the horses when a figure stepped from the shadows. "Going somewhere?" Rufus's voice was deadly calm, his gun aimed squarely at Nate's chest. Bonnie froze, terror washing through her. Nate shifted slightly, as if preparing to push her behind him. "Don't," Rufus warned. "I'll kill you both where you stand." "It's over, Montgomery," Nate said evenly. "Listen." In the distance, the gunfire had ceased. Male voices called to each other, unfamiliar voices, authoritative. "Marshals," Nate explained. "I told you they were coming." Rufus's face contorted with rage. "You're lying." "No, he isn't." A new voice spoke from behind Rufus. "U.S. Marshal Daniel Reed, drop your weapon, Montgomery." Rufus spun, firing wildly at the newcomer. The marshal dove for cover, returning fire. Nate shoved Bonnie to the ground, shielding her with his body as bullets flew overhead. When the shooting stopped, Bonnie raised her head to see Rufus slumped against the stable wall, blood darkening his shirt. The marshal approached cautiously, kicking Rufus's gun away before checking for signs of life. "He's dead," the marshal confirmed, turning to Nate. "Callahan, I presume? Your telegram said urgent, but I didn't expect a full-blown ambush." "Neither did I," Nate replied, helping Bonnie to her feet. "I'm glad you got here when you did. Got your second message about the change in plans, barely made it in time." The marshal nodded to Bonnie. "Madam, are you all right?" Bonnie stared at Rufus's body, a strange numbness spreading through her. 3 years of terror, of walking on eggshells, of enduring his cruelty, ended in a moment. "She's been through a lot," Nate answered for her, his arm protectively around her shoulders. "She's the one who warned me about the change in plans. Without her, we'd have lost the stagecoach and probably several lives." Marshal Reed nodded respectfully to Bonnie. "Then we owe you our thanks, Mrs. Montgomery." The name jolted her. Mrs. Montgomery, Rufus's wife. Except Rufus was dead and she was. What? Who is she now? What happens next? She asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "We'll need statements from both of you," the marshal said. "Then I suspect the Wells Fargo company will want to express their gratitude for stopping this gang. They've been a menace across 3 territories. And after that," Bonnie pressed. The marshal shrugged. "That's up to you, madam." As dawn broke over the desert, Bonnie sat on the station's porch, a blanket around her shoulders. The marshals had taken Rufus's body and the surviving members of his gang away. The stagecoach, warned of the danger, had continued safely on its journey. Nate emerged from the station, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He sat beside her, offering one. "Thank you," she said, accepting the warm cup. "For everything?" "I should be thanking you," he replied. "You saved my life back there. We saved each other." Bonnie stared into her coffee. "What will you do now? Return to Wells Fargo?" "Actually, I've been thinking about that." Nate's voice held a note of uncertainty she hadn't heard before. My job with the company is finished. I could go back to Texas, I suppose. Bonnie's heart sank at the thought of him leaving. In just a few days, Nate Callahan had become the center of her world, her rescuer, her ally, perhaps something more, or, he continued, I could stay in the territory for a while. There's a small ranch for sale outside Prescott, nothing fancy but good grazing land, they say. A ranch, Bonnie turned to him, hope fluttering in her chest. I've always wanted a place of my own. Nate set his coffee down, his blue eyes meeting hers. But a ranch is a lot of work for one person. Bonnie hardly dared breathe. Yes, I suppose it would be. Bonnie, Nate took her hand gently. I know we've only known each other a short time, and I know you've just been freed from a terrible situation. I wouldn't presume to ask me, she interrupted softly. He smiled, that genuine smile that transformed his face and warmed her from within. Would you consider coming with me, not as anything you don't want to be, just as a friend if that's all you want? I just know that I don't want to say goodbye to you. Tears filled Bonnie's eyes, not tears of sorrow or fear, but of a joy so profound it almost hurt. I don't want to say goodbye either. I can't offer much, he warned. The life of a rancher isn't easy. Is it a life without fear? Without cruelty? When he nodded, she continued, then it's more than I've had in years. Nate's fingers tightened around hers. I promise you this, Bonnie, if you choose to come with me, you'll never know fear from my hand, you'll never be anything but respected and cherished. The word hung in the air between them, full of promise. Bonnie realized that the flutter in her chest, the warmth that spread through her whenever Nate was near, these weren't just gratitude or relief. This was the beginning of something she had thought forever lost to her. Love. Yes, she whispered, I'll come with you. As the sun rose fully over the desert, painting the landscape in golds and reds, Nate Callahan leaned forward and kissed Bonnie gently. It was a kiss of promise, of new beginnings, of freedom found in the most unexpected circumstances. Ready to go home. He asked when they parted, home, such a simple word, yet it held everything Bonnie had longed for, not a place but a feeling of safety, of belonging, of love. Yes, she said, I'm ready. 3 months later, Bonnie stood on the porch of their small ranch house, watching Nate work with a young colt in the corral. The autumn breeze played with her hair, now grown longer and fuller without Rufus's insistence that she keep it tightly bound. The ranch was modest, a 2-bedroom house, a small barn, and 30 acres of decent grazing land. But to Bonnie, it was paradise. Here she was learning who she truly was. Beyond being someone's possession or victim, Nate had been true to his word. He never raised his voice to her, never made demands. Each day he asked what she wanted, what she thought, what she felt, as though her opinions were valuable, her desires important. Slowly she had healed. The nightmares came less frequently now. She no longer flinched when Nate moved suddenly or raised his hand to touch her face. And somewhere along the way, gratitude had blossomed into something deeper, richer, more complex. Love. They had married in a simple ceremony in Prescott, with Marshall Reed as their witness. Nate had insisted they wait until Bonnie was certain, until she knew her own mind and heart without the shadow of Rufus hanging over her. I want you to choose me, he had said, not just choose to escape him, and she had chosen him with all her heart. Nate looked up from his work with the colt, spotting her on the porch. His face broke into that smile that still made her breath catch. He secured the horse and crossed to her, removing his hat as he climbed the porch steps. Admiring the view, he teased. Indeed I was. Bonnie smiled, accepting his kiss. The colt's coming along nicely. He'll make a fine cow pony by spring. Nate's arm slipped around her waist. How are you feeling today? Bonnie placed her hand over her still flat stomach. Better. The morning sickness wasn't so bad. The news of the baby had come as a joyful surprise just weeks earlier. After the initial shock, Nate had lifted her in his arms and spun her around, his face alight with wonder and excitement. I never thought I'd have this, he had confessed later, his hand resting gently on her abdomen. A home, a wife I adore, a child on the way. I keep thinking I'll wake up and find it was all a dream. If it's a dream, Bonnie had replied, then we're sharing it. Now, As the afternoon sun bathed their little ranch in golden light, Bonnie leaned into her husband's embrace, marveling at how much had changed in just a few months. From a prisoner in a loveless, cruel marriage to a woman cherished and respected, expecting her first child with a man who treated her like a treasure. "What are you thinking about?" Nate asked, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "How strange life is," she replied. "How a single moment can change everything." "Meeting you in that saloon," he agreed. "I knew then that I couldn't leave Copper Creek without helping you, even though your job was just to catch Rufus." Nate turned her to face him, his blue eyes serious. "My job was to stop a criminal. But the moment I saw you saw the strength in you despite everything he'd done, I found a new purpose." "Rescuing damsels in distress," Bonnie teased gently. "No," he touched her cheek, his expression tender. "Finding the woman who would rescue me right back." Bonnie raised an eyebrow. "I rescued you every day." Nate's voice grew husky, from loneliness, from wandering without purpose, from a life half-lived. Tears pricked Bonnie's eyes. "I love you, Nate Callahan, and I love you, Bonnie Callahan, with everything I am." As the sun set over their small piece of Arizona territory, Bonnie reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had survived Rufus Montgomery's cruelty not just to escape, but to find this a love born of respect and kindness, a future filled with possibility instead of fear. Spring arrived with soft rains and wildflowers carpeting the hills around their ranch. Bonnie's body had changed with the seasons, her belly now round with the child due in early summer. The ranch was thriving under Nate's careful management. They had 10 head of cattle now, 2 good horses, and a vegetable garden that Bonnie tended daily. On a warm May morning, Bonnie sat in the rocking chair Nate had crafted for her, sewing a tiny gown for the baby. Through the open window, she could hear Nate's voice as he spoke to their nearest neighbor, Tom Wilson, who had ridden over with news from town. "U.S. Marshal's office sent word," Tom was saying. "Thought you'd want to know. They hanged Vernon Shaw yesterday in Yuma." Bonnie's hands stilled on her sewing. Vernon had survived his wounds from that night at the way station, only to stand trial alongside the other remaining members of Rufus's gang. "Good," Nate replied simply. "That closes the book on the Montgomery gang for good." "Town's different now," Tom continued. "New sheriff's done a fine job cleaning up what was left of their operation in Copper Creek, mining companies paying fair wages again, folks even reopened the school." "Glad to hear it." Nate's voice grew closer as the men walked toward the house. "Will you stay for dinner? Bonnie made apple pie yesterday." The men entered, removing their hats. Tom smiled when he saw Bonnie, his weathered face crinkling around the eyes. "Mrs. Callahan, you're looking well. Motherhood suits you already." "Thank you, Mr. Wilson." Bonnie set aside her sewing. "Will you join us for dinner? Wouldn't miss your cooking for the world, madam." As Bonnie moved to the kitchen to prepare the meal, she felt Nate's eyes follow her, full of warmth and pride. Their life wasn't grand or exciting by most standards. They worked hard, saved carefully, and enjoyed simple pleasures. But after years of living in terror, this quiet existence felt like heaven. That night, after their guest had departed and the house was still, Nate held Bonnie close in their bed, his hand resting protectively over their unborn child. "Tom's news upset you," he observed quietly. "I saw it in your eyes," Bonnie sighed. It still amazed her how well Nate could read her emotions, how attuned he was to her feelings. "Not upset exactly, just reminded. Sometimes I almost forget what life was like before." "That's good," Nate murmured against her hair. "That's healing." "Part of me will always be that frightened woman," she admitted. "The one who couldn't imagine freedom. And part of you will always be the brave woman who risked everything to warn a stranger about an ambush," Nate countered. "The woman who fought for her life and mine." Bonnie smiled in the darkness. "We saved each other. We still do. Every day." The baby kicked then, a strong movement that made them both laugh. "I think our little cowboy agrees," Bonnie said, or cowgirl, Nate suggested. "Either way, this child will grow up knowing only love and respect." "That's our promise." Bonnie turned in his arms, finding his lips with hers. "Our legacy." On a blazing July afternoon, after 14 hours of labor, Bonnie gave birth to a daughter. tiny but strong, with wisps of dark hair like her father's and eyes that promised to be as blue as the Arizona sky. "She's perfect," Nate whispered, cradling the infant with trembling hands. "Absolutely perfect. Sarah," Bonnie said softly, "after my mother, Sarah Callahan." Nate tested the name, his face radiant with joy. "I like it." As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, the little family settled into their rhythms. Sarah grew stronger each day, her personality emerging determined like her mother, gentle like her father. The ranch prospered modestly, providing enough for their needs and a little extra besides. On Christmas Eve, with Sarah sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Nate presented Bonnie with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, surprised. "Open it," he urged. Inside lay a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. Bonnie gasped as she opened it to find a tiny photograph of the three of them, taken when they had visited Prescott in the fall. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Look at the back," Nate said softly. She turned the locket over to find words engraved in the silver. "Love freed us both." Bonnie looked up at her husband, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all she felt. "It did, didn't it? Free us both." Nate knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "4 years ago, I was just a man doing a job, moving from town to town, never staying anywhere long enough to call it home. I had no roots, no purpose beyond the next assignment. And now," Bonnie prompted, though she knew the answer, "now I have everything." His voice thickened with emotion. "A home, a daughter, a wife who amazes me every day with her strength and kindness. You didn't just help me stop Rufus Montgomery, Bonnie. You showed me what life could be when shared with someone you love completely." Bonnie leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "I never thought I could be happy again after what Rufus did to me. I never thought I could trust or hope or dream." "And now," Nate echoed her question, she smiled through her tears. "Now I know that even the deepest wounds can heal. That love, real love, built on respect and kindness, can restore what was broken." As the fire crackled in the hearth and their daughter slept peacefully, Bonnie and Nate sealed their words with a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, a future built not on fear or control, but on the freedom that comes from loving and being loved in return. Years would pass. Sarah would be joined by 2 brothers. The ranch would grow, prosper. There would be challenges, drought years, illness, the normal struggles of life on the frontier. But through it all, Bonnie and Nate Callahan would face each day together, their bond strengthened by the knowledge of what they had overcome to find each other. And on warm summer evenings, when the children were asleep and the desert night spread its starry canopy above their home, they would sit together on the porch, hands entwined, marveling at the journey that had brought them from darkness into light, from captivity into freedom, from loneliness into love. In the wild terrain of the Arizona Territory, where danger and beauty existed side by side, they had found the rarest treasure of all, a love that healed, a love that freed, a love that would endure through all the seasons of their lives.